One of the highest achievements in any Pokemon game is completing the Pokedex. And I mean, the old slogan was, "Gotta catch 'em all." But what if you don't want to catch 'em all? I want to see how much you can fill your Pokedex from just fighting the Pokemon trainers. That includes the regular trainers on routes, gym leaders, rivals, extra battles, etc, etc. By going through this, some actual Pokedexes from each region may actually surprise you. Let's go through game to game to see which one is actually, well, missable. Let's start with everyone's favorite generation, including Game Freak's. Generation 1 with red, blue, green, and yellow. Now there's a few differences when it comes to the changes in mandatory battles, specifically when it comes to the rival fights. You see, he starts the starter at the type that you are weak against, while in the yellow version he fights you with an Eevee. Depending on the events on how you fight him in the lab and Route 22, will determine if you will either have a Vaporeon, Jolteon, or Flareon, as well as have 3 Pokemon that won't overlap with his ace. But now, I'm going to show you all the Pokemon you could see without fighting Pokemon in the wild, and specifically Red, Blue, and Green, because those games have the same exact trainers in all versions, whether it be Japanese or English. So, here's the list. Now, it's pretty interesting, but let's dive into some of the weirder exceptions. For example, if you start off with Charmander, you'll actually never get to see a Venusaur in any trainer battle, because your rival starts off with Squirtle, and you'll inevitably end up with Blastoise. Of course, there's a lot of Safari Zone Pokemon that are not held by trainers, like Pinsir and Scyther, as well as some more exclusive Pokemon that are version exclusives, like Magmar and Electabuzz. Eevee was meant to be a special Pokemon back in Kanto, and it makes sense that no one would have any of the Eeveelutions. Same goes with the fossils, even though the fossil character is right there. But the oddest one of the bunch is Psyduck and Krabby. You can face their evolutions from trainers, but not in their base form. Not in the ocean routes, or even in Misty's gym. It's not even like their version exclusives either. Of course, I'm gonna be mentioning the legendaries here, but most of the time these rare Pokemon you have to go out of your way to find anyways. And if they're not a box art legendary, chances are you're not gonna find them on any trainer's team. And of course, Mew is impossible to be obtained by any legitimate means, so same goes with Mythicals. Yellow's version is slightly different, because it has to factor in the rival and some gym leader changes, but for the most part, it stays pretty identical. But while we're on the topic of Kanto, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green also have a very similar looking dex to the original, though with 2 key changes, that being the Versus Seeker and the Sevi Islands. The Versus Seeker allows you to rematch trainers in the overworld, and some trainers have more evolved and sometimes new Pokemon on their team. Not every trainer has these sort of rematch teams, but when they come up, they will have some new entries. And the Sevi Islands actually include some more trainers, but they also have Johto Pokemon in the post-game as well, so I'll take them into account. So as well as counting as the regular dex, we're also going to count the Johto Pokemon as well as for the national one, because let's face it, you're not going to find any Hoenn Pokemon in Kanto, besides, I guess, Deoxys, I guess? As you can tell, it's very similar to the originals. Matter of fact, the grand majority of Pokemon I found by just rematching a lot of trainers, though of course some remain elusive than others, like Electabuzz, Scyther, Magmar, and Pinsir, as well as the evolutions, fossils, and once again Venusaur. But this time Diglett is nowhere to be seen on anyone's team. Don't understand why that is. It was perfectly fine in red and blue and yellow, but Diglett is just gone. If you see the ones that are marked in green, those are the ones that are specific to the Sevi Islands. And finally, the Elite Four does have a few Johto Pokemon on their rematch team, so that's neat. And finally, there's Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. And considering this game is all about catching Pokemon, there's probably not going to be enough trainers, so here's the total. Oh, wow. Wait, actually, hold on, what? So Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee have the most so far. That's kind of impressive, actually. And this is the game where there are actually these trainers called Master Trainers, where you have one of each Pokemon, and you have to fight them or show them a good enough Pokemon to pass. But even then, not counting them, the only Pokemon you actually have to go out of your way to find is Kabuto and Ammonite. Every other Pokemon that isn't a legendary or a Meltan/Melmetal can be fought as a trainer as well. Even previous ones that were missed, like Dratini, Dragonair, and the Eeveelution can be fought as well. So for the end, I like to add up the percentages, so here you go. Not bad. Alright, on to the next game. Gen 2, or Gold, Silver, and Crystal, introduced 100 new Pokemon to the mix, and it combines with the Kanto Dex to become the first full national dex. But regardless, here are all the Pokemon that trainers have in Gold, Silver, and Crystal. And if it wasn't obvious already, the Johto games do not include those dang Johto Pokemon. But once again, the starters are a little strange this time. If you go through the entire game, you can actually fight trainers who actually have the Kanto starters, and including all their evolutionary forms. But no one else has the Johto starters except for you and your rival. So by technicalities, if you never evolve one of them, you'll technically only see 4 throughout the game. Though that's really unrealistic being a game with a single Chikorita. Similarly, some Pokemon like the Fossils, the Legendary Birds, and Mewtwo are completely unattainable in this game, but Aerodactyl is via a trade, and Lance does have one on his team, so you'll at least say that one. The main mechanic people might be interested in hearing is the rematch system in GSC. In the game, some trainers will exchange numbers with you, and within certain time frames, they'll call you back for a rematch, or find a new Pokemon that's out and about. Some trainers will have exclusive Pokemon if you do rematch them, like on Route 36, School Trainer Alan will now have a Yanma. In the Shining Lighthouse, Sailor Huey will have a Politoed if you rematch him in specifically Crystal, otherwise they'll only have a Poliwhirl in Silver. The legendaries are also pretty skippable as well, even though they are on the box arts, but the most interesting ones I actually might think is an error. On Route 38 and Route 26 specifically, there's a trainer with a Corsola that's in Crystal that is not in Gold and Silver, and a Psychic trainer that has a Sunkern. From my general research and playing these games, I don't think I've ever seen that, but correct me if I'm wrong. Anyways, Heart Gold and Soul Silver are next, and they have the expanded Pokedex as well, but I don't think it really matters in the long run. I did use the National Dex for my image here, mostly for the reason because a lot of trainers will have Pokemon from other regions, and rematches from gym leaders in Saffron Dojo do a lot of the heavy lifting. To be fair, I did make a regional Dex count, but the only Pokemon that it adds there is Tangrowth, Yanmega, Ambipom, and Mamoswine. But Ambipom is the only Pokemon that a trainer doesn't actually own. So, there you go. The only other thing I can mention is that you could technically encounter both Ho and Lugia in the same game, but only one of them is actually mandatory for story progression, so I didn't count the other one. But with that, here comes the final total. And since this is my video, I just love putting in extra work, I added percentages to the new Pokemon in the region as well. Johto Pokemon get a percentage too. Don't say I never did anything for you guys. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald version does have a lot of new Pokemon, plenty of awesome ones too, but for this experiment I'm going to see how many of the new 135 Pokemon, then look at the full Home Index. Sure, there are some National Dex trainers here and there, but most of them are in the Battle Frontier and they won't actually register in your National Pokedex. This game also features a lot of trainer rematches too, also known as Trainer Eyes in Ruby and Sapphire in the Match Call system in Pokemon Emerald. The only difference is that Emerald will have the Gym Leader rematches in the post-game, so here's the Ruby and Sapphire list specifically. As you can see, we actually got a lot of them. Granted, most of the trade evolutions are from the rematches, so they deserve a lot of credit for doing, once again, a lot of the heavy lifting. Unlike most other games, your rival takes a back seat from battling, so you actually never get to see a fully evolve their starter. So most likely you'll be stuck with just seeing, well, technically 3 if you don't evolve one of your starters, but realistically you're going to see 5. As long as you don't abandon your starter. But would you abandon a face like this? Some other weird choices I noticed, like Electrode actually being missable because the only time you can encounter one is in the Aqua and Magma hideouts, or the trainers that have coughing and wheezing, but not Grimer specifically. And weirdly enough, no trainer uses the Gulpin line, the Corphish line, the Swoink line, and the Clamperl line the whole game. Like, Johto I understand because it's tied to the Kanto region, and those Johto Pokemon are rare to find, but for this one it's actually crazy. I understand that Clamperl is pretty rare, but how can you open a Psychic Gym and not include the best Pokemon Grumpig? Actual blasphemy over here. Anyways, believe it or not, Emerald actually has a lot of different sets of trainers, including a lot more double battles in the overworld. They actually have changed some trainers' teams as well, and I'll use the National Dex version of Hoenn because, well, that's really the first mainline game to use it. So here's the Emerald's Dex total. Some Gen 3 Pokemon that weren't on trainers' teams are now on those teams, and since those Gym Leader rematches have more Johto and Kanto Pokemon, using the full list would be very more fitting. though a few of them actually do have a few question marks next to them. For my research, I use Cerebee's Poke-Earth, which actually does a lot of great details on where trainers are, where items are, etc, etc. But for the older games, a lot of them are a little weird. For example, Black Belt Koji has a Machoke starting out, and with more rematches he gets a Mangakita, then a Hariyama, but his last team consists of a Hariyama, a War Turtle, and a level 3 Machamp. But using other sites like the fan page on trainer rematches tells a completely different story. Those are left to be completely missed until more footage exists like that, but since match call sucks and no one wants to do that, I just figured that I'll go on my own general assumptions. It's not like anyone cares, really. Also, fun fact, in the Tate and Liza rematch, they say they have a level 63 Drowsy, but in footage you actually see it's a hit now. But yeah, it's self-explanatory for Emerald. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire was actually the last game to feature the National Dex that's over 700 Pokemon, so I used the National Dex for my research. Like Heart Gold and Soul Silver, some trainers will have other Pokemon from different regions, but for this one, there's actually a lot more than that one. And also, this chart might be incredibly blurry and difficult to tell, but I assure you, there's a lot to track. The only other thing, though, is that Alpha Sapphire specifically will have a higher Dex total, only by 1, but that Pokemon will specifically beat Grimer, mostly because Koffings are usually held by Magma Grunts, and Grimers are usually held by Aqua Grunts. Some trainers on Route 113 will have Coughing and Wheezing, however, so there's that. And also, you are forced to perceive Latios and Omega Ruby, and Latios and Alpha Sapphire. But aside from that, here are the totals. There's a lot to track, I assure you. So, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. This one's a weird one, not because the Pokemon are hard to see, but in this case, battling every mandatory fight actually gets you to see all the Pokemon in the National Dex. Every Pokemon can be seen by just fighting these trainers, only because it's tied to the postgame. Kinda. Okay, so legendaries have to be seen or fought to actually complete the Pokedex, like the Lake Trio, and going to Cynthia's grandmother's house to see the opposite mascot legendary. And in Platinum, you have to stop by the old chateau for Rotom, and read the book in the Pokemon Mansion to see Manaphy. But other than that, it's basically free. But still, I was curious on the National Dex, because some trainers have Pokemon outside the home region. So here's the list for Diamond and Pearl specifically. Interesting. Platinum has a little bit more extra Pokemon, but even then, they're all still accounted for in that game specifically, so no need to worry about that there. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are literally coded off of Gen 4's code, so yeah, aside from a few differences here and there, you can still see every single Pokemon. There's just a few more Pokemon to see in the Elite Four because of their second rematch team, and though the funniest outlier for the National Dex is, oddly enough, the Professor Assistants in Dawn and Lucas, where in some teams they'll have Pokemon you'll less likely see already to, oh, there are starters on that team. So some of them, depending on which starter you chose and which gender you are, actually will determine with your deck being higher or lower. Also, what is this Typhlosion set? God, they really just want to nuke someone, don't you? But yeah, the overall percentage of the region is going to be generally high, so yeah. Damn, how do I segue these segments consistently? On to Generation 5 with Black and White. My personal favorite generation, by the way. There's 156 new Pokemon to see in the vast land of Unova, and the first set of games, you're only restricted to using the Pokemon from Unova instead of the ones outside of the region, which means it's very similar to Kanto in terms of availability. So by just the trainers having them, the results will be shocking. Look at this list. So many can just be seen by facing the trainers, and I think that's nice. Of course, there are the legendaries that are, well, findable out in the wild, and no trainer will ever use them. Well, except for N, of course. And like that, the starters are odd. You know, if you technically don't want to evolve your starter, you're only going to be seeing 7. But moving on from that, a lot of Pokemon from the tail end of the decks are notably missing from teams. Especially Rufflet and Vullaby. What's stranger is that Amoonguss is on one team, at least in part of the game, but Foongus is never on any trainer's team. Similarly, Ferroseed is on at least one team, while Ferrothorn is not. Zora is supposed to be a special Pokemon, so yeah, no trainer has one. but Zoroark is on N's team. But overall, the ratio for black and white is great. Even the national dex is pretty good too. If you see the Pokemon's evolution, chances are they'll have the pre-evolution, which is pretty cool overall. Black and White 2 are the sequels, and they are a little bit more different. They still do have the 156 Unova Pokemon, but they now add some of the previous regions to not make the game more samey, so we'll count the national dex for that one too. It's a big one, but still, I'm happy about how many Pokemon you can cram into just one chargage, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Black and White 2's regional dex is nice, though some outliers need to be mentioned, specifically the starters. In the game, you'll only have your one rival, Hugh, and you'll have the line of starter that you're weak against. But in Nimbasa City, you'll have this random fight against Ingo and Emmett, and you're partnered up with the other trainer character, and they'll have the middle form of your starter that you're strong against. Don't know why, and they don't really go anywhere else in the game, but oh well. Similarly, if you use the Memory Link feature, you can actually battle trainers like Bianca and Sharon using their old team. So if you're doing this optimally, you'll actually be able to see all 9 starters if you evolve yours. But realistically, if you don't, you're gonna only have 8. Other than that, it's self-explanatory. Don't even get me started on this national dex. Good god, 649 Pokemon is a lot. God damn. Anyway, here are the totals. X and Y in Generation 6 have the lowest amount of new Pokemon introduced at 72, probably because they wanted to showcase all those new Mega Pokemon that weren't given to any of the new Pokemon besides Diancie. Well, at least not yet. But this time, the Pokemon is split into 3 different biomes: the Central Dex, the Coastal Dex, and the Mountain Dex, having around 150 Pokemon or so in each of the totals. So the rankings will be all over the place. So here it is. These lists are getting harder and harder to read, I swear. Obviously, the box legendaries are going to be the version exclusives, and the starters are also a little odd this time around. The main rival, that being Serena or Calum, will fight you the most, but you'll never actually see the first stage of their starter, only the middle and final evolutions. But oh no, we needed the 5 fights in the mid-game. We really needed that. Funny enough, if you started with either Chessman or Fennekin, you'll actually never fight a Vaporeon in the game. But the only trainer that actually have a Vaporeon is your rival. Some trainers actually do have Flareon and Jolteon, as well as the rest of the evolutions, but Vaporeon, and oddly enough, Eevee, is also signaled out too. But aside from that, there's not really much to report on. I know there is a national dex I can talk about, but come on. Have you seen the post-game of X and Y? Do people even know what happens in the post-game? Does a post-game even exist in that? Well, the answer is obviously, yeah, there is a post-game, but it's my video, so here's the final scores. Alright, it's time for a good game now. Sun and Moon and its Ultra variants. Yeah, I can see a lot of people being annoyed by that comment. 86 new Pokemon are here to see and to absolutely not catch. And there's also a few Alolan forms this year, but we're not going to count them as actually new Pokemon, we're only going to count them in the regional decks. And let's see the results. And wow, what a turnout. I'm honestly shocked how many trainers are in this game, considering the fact that gyms are absent in the region, being replaced by the much simpler trial challenges. But still, there's not even a rematch system in this game either, which makes things even more impressive. The starters are obviously the problem here, when are they not? Your rival Hal will have the starter that you're strong against, and the champion battle with Kukui will have the final of all starter that you're weak against. Legendaries and Ultra Beasts are also very weird in this sort of list. The Tapu Pokemon are optional, except for Tapu Koko, where you fight them at the very end of the story after the Pokemon League. And the Ultra Beasts, although in the post-game, are sorta required to be encountered. Kinda. I mean, if you want to access the $1 million that Looker actually gives to you, I guess it counts. But for right now, we're not really just gonna count them. It's also weird how some Pokemon from the region are just absent on trainers' teams, like Minior and... Oh wait, Minior is just missing? Oh, that's odd. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon are like Platinum, as in being the alternate versions of the same game that you bought full price a year ago. except there are 2 of them now. And they also add an extra 100 Pokemon to the regional dex. But again, nothing to complain about when it comes to finding a lot of them. Mostly because the game likes to flesh out trainers' teams and make them a little bit more difficult. And hey, Minior is here and accounted for. Though, we are missing one in particular that bothers me. Pikipek. Not a single trainer in the game has the Route 1 bird. Not found in any of the island trainers, not in any important battles, not even any mandatory wild battles. Pikipek was in base Sun Moon just fine. Was there just a rule just saying that no trainer has to have Pikipek by any accounts necessary? Also, you know what else is very funny? When you're doing the math and calculating all the trainers and Pokemon, / the title and Pokemon, I also found that Grubbin, the Route 1 bug, is also on no trainer's team, but it's still marked because of the catching tutorial, which I guess technically counts. The one time Sun Moon's tutorial save us. Hallelujah. Oh, and the starters are almost the same, but this time around you have to add a 1 for the trainer school teacher, actually on the starters that you're weak against. And this is the first game without an actual national dex, though you can catch and use all the other Pokemon thanks to Island Scan and Pokemon Bank, as well as the Rainbow Rocket set quest, but will not be counted towards your Pokedex completion. But that's all about for the changes of Sun and Moon. Anyways, here are the results. On to the next region. Sword and Shield are very easy games, so easy in fact that most trainers in this game never have more than 2 Pokemon. 3 if you're extra daring today. So here's the dex total. Now I don't want to be a very negative Nancy in this entire section, so let's start with the positives. You can find all the starters in the wild area from a trainer, only at specific times, but hey, that's nice. And since there's no need to worry about legendaries this time around, you have to face them all in the end anyways, so that's nice. But that's where all the positives end. On the negative side, this was awful to research. The biggest thing you'll notice that there's a whole lot of colors going on in this chart. Like there's cyan, blue, red, green, yellow, pink. What is going on? Well, let me break it down for you. Okay, not that way to break it down. The cyan one is available for any trainer that you actually find in both versions, while the darker blue and red are in version fight exclusives. Don't get me wrong, this is cool. I want more Pokemon games to do this to justify the fact that you're spending $120 on 2 of the same game essentially, but piecing this stuff together can just be very annoying. For example, a lot of the fighting and rock-type Pokemon are exclusive to Sword because, well, the gyms are in that game, and Shield has the Ghost and Ice Pokemon locked in those games respectively because of the gyms. But you may be curious on the yellow and green lines. That's because of the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra DLC expansion. And it just makes the number much smaller. You wanna know why? Because there's actually no trainers in this area. Why? It's confusing me that you have this incredibly open space but not someone to actually fight. It's so weird. It's nice exploring the wild area, but after a while it just gets kind of boring when there's absolutely no trainer to fight. Even then there's more version exclusive fights because you have these 2 trainers to worry about, and also a few others here and there. And don't forget about the many pink circles around these certain Pokemon. Why is that? Well, a large part is due to the extra side mode in the Crown Tundra, the Max Lair, which, unlike most facilities, it actually lets you see and catch the Pokemon here. And this wouldn't be a bad thing if it was optional, but no, it's mandatory to find Peony's daughter, and most likely you'll be able to see 3 to 7 new Pokemon here. So, I don't know, the odds are like that is 40%, but still, it's stressful to figure out. This took me days to accurately research and calculate, all because of this one stupid mode. But whatever. Here's the results. I did my best, and if it's wrong, whatever. It's not the end of the world. Also, before you ask, no, I will not cover Legends Arceus. You can count the amount of mandatory trainers you can face on your fingers and toes. If you're more curious on the lowest amount of total that you can find in your Pokedex, just watch Johnstone's video on that. Let's just move on. finally, we entered the last game to be mentioned in the list today, Gen 9's Scarlet and Violet, which fixes a lot of Sword and Shield's problems by actually being fun to play. Although it's very similar dex-wise, 400 to be exact, this region actually has trainers in it. So let's just see what the score is, and it's actually a satisfying result. It same goes with the Teal Naz DLC and the Blueberry Dex too. There's actually trainers that can be found and fought here. Though Blueberry's problem is that since it's a post-game area, you'll mostly be only fighting fully evolved Pokemon here. And there's also a few weird ones to point out here too. Like in the Blueberry Dex, there are all the available starters, and most of them aren't not really fought by trainers, though a few of them actually are thanks to the rematch battles in the Blueberry Academy. But specifically, Nemona will either have Infernape, Greninja, or Decidueye depending on which starter you started off with. She'll also have a Dusknoir, which, well, you can't actually fight if you started with 2 starters specifically, only with 1 in particular. So, hypothetically, pick that one for the higher result. And the starters are the same in Base, Sun, and Moon. Thank you, Clavel, for including that one mention of, well, that starter. But aside from the few Pokemon being left out, that's about it. Here are the totals. And that's the end of the video. So you may be asking, what is the point of this video? I don't know. I just thought this would be a fun video to just figure out. I mean, catching Pokemon in the series is just natural to most people. Same goes with wild encounters. I'm just surprised how many Pokemon you can actually see from each of the regions by just facing trainers. Now, is it actually possible to achieve this sort of mentality? Maybe, if you have a ton of repels and a lot of luck. But otherwise, yeah, I could see this happening. It might be in any % low category by facing all the trainers. Who knows, that might actually be a thing you might try. Oh, and if you are curious, here are the Pokemon that were never on Trainer's team, mostly legendaries, but there are a few oddballs out here. So if you want to do a challenge with these specific Pokemon, there you go. Well, that's it for this, and hopefully the next game will have plenty of trainers. Trust me, we're not done with that yet.